The day my stepmother introduced me to her guests as the charity case we took in was the day I stopped believing anyone would ever see me again. The funeral took place on a gray afternoon when I was 17. I stood beside my father's casket in a black dress that no longer fit, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Kwame Mensah had been everything to me, protector, provider, the last connection to a mother I'd lost at 7. Now he was gone too, taken by a car accident on a rain-slicked highway, and Maria felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. Her stepmother, Akojua, stood beside her with one manicured hand on Maria's shoulder, maternal comfort to the assembled mourners. On Akojua's other side stood Amma, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. They looked like a grieving family unit. But Maria could feel the coldness radiating from Akojua's touch, the impatience in that grip. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch this without subscribing, it's like staying in that garage and suffering unjustly. When you hit that subscribe button, you stand with every young girl who is being mistreated by her stepmother. So, subscribe now and in the comments tell me what you think. Because today you're about to see what really happens when a girl's voice is silenced. Her grandmother, Abina, should have been there, but she died 3 years earlier, or so Maria had been told. Akojua had delivered the news with practiced sadness. Abina had drowned during a business trip to South Africa, her body swept away by ocean currents. Maria had been devastated, losing the grandmother who'd taught her to read, who'd built a telecommunications empire from nothing, who'd promised Maria would inherit her strength. Now both her grandmother and father were gone, and she was alone with Akojua and Amma. The lawyer arrived as the last guests left, spreading papers across the dining room table. Everything, the house, investments, the life insurance, was left in trust for Maria, with Akojua as guardian until Maria turned 25. The mask dropped the moment the front door closed. Akojua turned to face Maria with cold, calculating eyes. She walked slowly around the table, heels clicking against marble with deliberate precision. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of all pretense. She told Maria her father had been weak, that he'd married beneath himself twice. The words landed like physical blows. Akojua continued, outlining the new reality with brutal clarity. The house belonged to her now. She controlled the money, made the decisions. Maria would follow her rules or find herself with nowhere to go. When Maria tried to protest, Akojua laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Legal documents meant nothing. Maria was 17, alone, with no one to protect her. That first night, Akojua ordered Amma to move into Maria's bedroom. Maria's belongings were pulled from drawers and closets, stuffed into black garbage bags. When Maria tried to save a framed picture of her mother, Akojua snatched it and dropped it in a bag, cracking the glass. She told Maria to carry everything to the garage. That's where she'd be sleeping now. Charity cases don't get bedrooms, Akojua said, voice dripping with disdain. Akojua established rules designed to strip away Maria's identity. She was forbidden from using the surname Mensah in public. When introduced to visitors, she'd be described as a relative's child they were helping, never as Kwame's daughter. She wouldn't eat with the family. She'd help with cleaning and household tasks, and she'd be grateful. That night, alone in the garage, Maria sat on bare concrete surrounded by garbage bags. The space was cold and dim, lit by a single bulb. Gardening tools lined the walls, oil stains marked the floor. This was her home now, this concrete box smelling of gasoline. She clutched her mother's necklace and thought about Abina, wishing desperately she was still alive. She would never have allowed this. Abina had been a force of nature, a self-made billionaire. When Maria's mother died, Abina had been her rock, promising that she was a Mensa, and that name meant strength, resilience, legacy. But Abina had drowned 3 years ago, and now Maria was truly alone. Months became years. Maria attended public school while Amma went to an expensive private academy. She focused on her studies with fierce determination, earning top grades because school was the only place where she could prove she mattered. Her history teacher, Mr. Boateng, noticed her potential and the bruises on her hands from scrubbing floors, how she sometimes fell asleep from exhaustion, never had money for lunch. One day he pulled her aside and asked if everything was all right at home. Maria lied smoothly, saying she was clumsy and worked part-time to help her family. By 19, the erasure was nearly complete. At home, she existed in perpetual invisibility. Akojua hosted frequent social events where Maria was forced to wear a plain black dress and serve drinks like hired staff. The guests rarely looked at her directly. One evening, a woman named Efua, an old friend of her father's, suddenly recognized her. She called out Maria's name with obvious concern, asking what had happened. Before Maria could respond, Akojua materialized beside them, explaining in false compassion that yes, this was poor Maria. They'd taken her in as charity after Kwame's death. Efua looked disturbed but uncertain. Maria watched her choose comfort over truth. The dinner party continued. Maria was ordered to stand in the corner, ready to refill glasses but not permitted to sit or eat. She stood there for 3 hours. No one said anything. No one questioned why Kwame Mensah's daughter was being treated like a servant in her own home. The silence confirmed what Akojua kept telling her, that she truly was nobody, that her name meant nothing, that she could be erased without consequence. When Maria turned 21, she received acceptance letters from 3 universities, full scholarships based on exceptional grades. For the first time in years, she felt hope. University meant escape, distance, possibility. But Akojua found the letters before Maria could hide them. She read through each one slowly, then tore them into pieces methodically, letting shredded paper fall like confetti. She forced Maria to write rejection letters, standing over her shoulder. Maria's hand shook as her dreams crumbled to dust with each pen stroke. That same year, Amma got engaged. Akojua ordered Maria to serve at the engagement party wearing a maid's costume, black dress with white apron and collar. When the package arrived and Maria saw the outfit, something inside her finally cracked. She confronted Akojua in the kitchen, voice shaking, saying this was her father's house, that she had rights. Years of suppressed anger poured out in a desperate torrent. Akojua's response was immediate and brutal. She slapped Maria across the face, then leaned in close. Maria had nothing, was nothing. She'd existed in that liminal space for 5 years now, erased so completely that no one remembered she'd once been somebody. Who would believe her? Who would care? The slap wasn't what broke Maria. It was the absolute certainty in Akojua's voice, the unshakable confidence that she'd won completely. What Maria didn't know was that her grandmother Abina was very much alive. She hadn't drowned off South Africa 5 years earlier. She'd suffered a massive stroke during a business meeting in Cape Town, severe enough to put her in a coma for 6 months. When she finally woke, her memory was fractured. Whole chunks of her life scattered like puzzle pieces she couldn't fit together. Her business partner, Kofi, stayed by her side through recovery. It took months of physical therapy before Abina could walk again, nearly 2 years before her memories started coming back with clarity. When she finally remembered her son Kwame, remembered her granddaughter Maria. The joy was immediately followed by desperate urgency. But Kofi had devastating news. Kwame had died in a car accident years earlier. Abina's next question was immediate. What about Maria? Kofi's investigation uncovered that Maria had supposedly moved away after Kwame's death to live with distant relatives. But something didn't sit right with Abina. Her granddaughter would have tried to find her, unless she thought Abina was dead too. Abina discovered someone had spread information about her drowning, sent documentation claiming her body was lost at sea. The pieces fell into place. Akojua, Kwame's second wife, a woman Abina had never trusted, must have blocked all contact, and based on property records, she'd been systematically draining the estate. Abina hired a private investigator named Ajoa. 3 months later, what Ajoa uncovered made Abina's blood run cold. Akojua was still living in Kwame's house, but there was no public record of Maria anywhere. For a 22-year-old woman, that level of invisibility was deeply suspicious. Ajoa staked out the house for weeks. Then one evening, she saw a young woman emerge from the garage carrying cleaning supplies. Even from a distance, Ajoa could see the family resemblance. She was thinner, movements cautious, but it was definitely Maria. She knocked on the back door like a servant and waited for permission to enter. Ajoa expanded her investigation. An elderly neighbor named Auntie Ya confirmed with tears that Maria lived in the garage, was treated like household staff, that the entire neighborhood knew something was wrong but no one had intervened. Akojua was powerful and vindictive. People were afraid. Ajoa returned with photographs, witness statements, financial records. Akojua had been systematically isolating and abusing Maria while embezzling from her trust fund. Properties had been sold, investments liquidated, money transferred to Akojua's accounts. She'd forged documents and filed false reports. The most damning evidence was a letter from university records, Maria's handwritten rejection of a full scholarship, the shaky writing suggesting coercion. Abina stared at that letter, hands trembling with fury. Her granddaughter had been imprisoned in her own home, identity stripped away, future stolen. 5 years of her life destroyed by a woman who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth. Abina made a decision. She was going to Accra immediately, and she was going to bring Maria home. The night before Ama's engagement party, the house was in controlled chaos. Caterers prepared elaborate dishes while Akojua supervised with exacting perfectionism. Ama practiced her smile for photos. In the garage, Maria sat on her mattress, trying to prepare herself for the humiliation ahead. She'd stopped fighting years ago, stopped hoping for rescue. Survival required acceptance. Then came a knock at the front door, loud, authoritative, impossible to ignore. The house manager answered and immediately stepped back. Outside stood 3 black SUVs with tinted windows. A security detail of 4 men in dark suits flanked the entrance, and at the center stood a woman in her 70s wearing an impeccably tailored suit, her presence commanding immediate respect. Abina Mensah had arrived, and she wasn't asking permission. Akojua appeared at the door, summoned by the commotion. The blood drained from her face when she saw who was standing there. Her carefully maintained composure shattered, revealing genuine shock and fear. Abina looked at her with cold eyes. Her voice was calm but carried absolute authority. She was surprised to see Akojua looking so well, considering she'd attended Abina's funeral 5 years ago. The sarcasm cut like a blade. Akojua tried to recover, babbling about the reports of drowning, about how they'd mourned her. But Abina cut through her performance with surgical precision, demanding to know where her granddaughter was. Akojua's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, false confusion. She claimed Maria had moved away after Kwame's death to live with cousins. The lie came smoothly practiced, but Abina didn't believe it. Behind her, her lawyer and investigator Ajoa stood ready with folders of evidence. Neighbors gathered on the street. Auntie Yas stood on her porch, hand over her mouth, recognizing Abina. Abina told Akojua she had financial records proving Maria never left, witness statements from neighbors who'd watched her granddaughter being abused for 5 years. The words stripped away layers of Akojua's facade. Amma cracked under the pressure. She blurted out that Maria was in the garage. Abina's face transformed, rage and heartbreak and disbelief combining into an expression that made even her security team step back. Her granddaughter, living in a garage in her own family home? She pushed past Akojua and strode through the house. She knew exactly where the garage was. Abina opened the door and stopped dead. The single bulb provided barely enough light, but what she could see broke something fundamental inside her. Her granddaughter, Kwame's daughter, the little girl she'd taught to read and promised to protect, was sitting on a bare mattress on concrete, surrounded by cleaning supplies, gardening tools, oil stains. She wore an old sweatshirt and jeans, and when she looked up, her eyes were wide with confusion and fear. She didn't recognize Abina at first. 5 years of suffering had aged her beyond her 22 years. Abina's voice cracked when she said her name, all authority draining away to reveal only grief. She pulled out her phone and showed Maria a photograph, herself with 12-year-old Maria at her birthday party 7 years earlier. Maria's expression changed as recognition dawned. She whispered Abina's name like a prayer, asking if she was real because they'd told her she drowned, told her she was dead. Abina crossed the space and knelt on that oil-stained floor, pulling her granddaughter into her arms. 5 years of pain poured out of Maria in heaving sobs as she clutched at her grandmother's jacket. She told her everything in broken fragments, how Akojua had erased her, how she'd been forbidden to use her own name, how no one had helped, how she'd been made to feel like nothing for so long she'd almost started believing it. Abina held her and wept, this powerful billionaire reduced to tears over the suffering of the child she'd failed to protect. She promised Maria that nobody would ever hurt her again, that she was there now and everything would be made right. She told her she knew her name, Maria Mensa, her granddaughter, her blood, her heir, and promised that the whole world was about to know that name too, would know exactly what had been done to her and who would pay the price. She helped Maria stand and led her out of that garage, through the house where she'd been erased, past the stepmother who'd tried to destroy her. Akojua stood frozen in the foyer, face ashen, understanding that her carefully constructed house of lies was collapsing. Abina called the police, refusing to let Maria out of her sight. Officers arrived within 15 minutes, and Ajoa began presenting evidence with methodical efficiency. Financial fraud, identity theft, filing false death reports, guardianship abuse, embezzlement. The charges piled up while Akojua tried desperately to maintain control. But the evidence was overwhelming. Auntie Yas stepped forward, voice shaking but determined, giving a statement about what she'd witnessed over 5 years. Other neighbors followed, each adding testimony to the damning portrait. Even Mr. Kruma, the businessman who'd attended Akojua's dinner parties, came forward. The police arrested both Akojua and Amma, handcuffs clicking shut with satisfying finality. Amma broke down immediately, Akojua shot her daughter a look of contempt before turning that same look on Maria. Her final words dripped with venom, calling Maria an ungrateful wretch who'd been given a roof and safety. But Abina's response cut through that delusion like a knife. A garage floor wasn't a roof, and torture didn't qualify as safety. She told the officers to take them away, her voice carrying absolute authority. Abina took Maria to a private hospital that same night. Doctors found chronic malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, untreated injuries from years of physical labor, and psychological trauma that would take years to address. Abina stayed by Maria's bedside through that first night and many nights after, unwilling to leave her alone. Maria asked the question she'd been dreading. Why hadn't she come sooner? Abina explained everything: the stroke, the coma, the memory loss, the years of recovery. She showed Maria the investigation files, showed her how she'd been searching from the moment she remembered she existed. She told Maria she'd never been forgotten, never been erased from her heart. Maria listened and finally allowed herself to believe that someone had been looking for her, that she truly hadn't been abandoned. The legal proceedings moved forward with overwhelming evidence. Akojua was charged with multiple felonies. The prosecutor's office built an airtight case using Ajoa's investigation, witness testimony, financial forensics, and Maria's statement. Ama took a plea deal early, testifying against her mother. Her testimony revealed the calculated nature of Akojua's abuse and her plan to keep Maria suppressed until well past her 25th birthday. The trial attracted significant media attention. Maria didn't attend most proceedings, focusing on recovery, but she gave a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in stunned silence. She spoke about what it felt like to be systematically erased, to have her name taken away, to be made invisible in her own life. The judge sentenced Akojua to 15 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution of all embezzled funds plus penalties. Every asset Akojua had acquired through fraud was seized and returned to Maria's control. With the original inheritance plus 5 years of investment growth, Maria was now worth approximately 8 million cedis. And that didn't include her position as Abina's heir. 3 months after her rescue, Maria enrolled in university with her grandmother's full support. She chose business school, wanting to understand the empire Abina had built. She didn't move back into her father's house. The memories were too painful. Instead, she lived with Abina in the family estate. For the first time in 5 years, she had her own bedroom with soft sheets and warm blankets. She had regular meals at a table where she was welcome to speak and be heard. She had a grandmother who asked about her day and cared about her answers. The healing process was slow and nonlinear. Some days she felt strong and hopeful. Other days the trauma resurfaced. But she was healing, which was more than she dared hope for during those years in the garage. One afternoon, Maria returned to her father's house for the first time since the rescue. In the attic, she found boxes that Akojua had hidden but never destroyed. Photographs of Maria's childhood, pictures of her mother, mementos from her early years. Maria spent hours reclaiming pieces of her history. She had the photos professionally restored and framed, then hung them throughout the house in a deliberate act of restoration. This was her home, her history, her family's legacy, and no one would erase it again. A year after her rescue, Maria made a decision that surprised even Abina. She would host a charity gala at her father's house, not to prove anything to those who'd failed her, but to reclaim the space on her own terms and to support other young people in guardianship situations. Many of the same people who'd attended Akojua's parties came, perhaps hoping for a chance at redemption. Maria stood in the foyer wearing an elegant dress and her mother's necklace, greeting guests with genuine warmth from a place of healing. She was no longer the invisible girl in the garage. She was Maria Mensah, university student, heir to a business empire, survivor, and most importantly, herself. Mr. Kruma approached early, his discomfort obvious. He told her he owed her an apology, that he should have asked questions years ago. Maria appreciated the honesty and told him that his presence now mattered more than his silence then. She wasn't interested in holding grudges. She was interested in moving forward and ensuring other people in her situation had advocates and protection. Auntie Ya was given a seat of honor, the elderly neighbor who'd been willing to acknowledge the truth. Maria made sure everyone knew that Auntie Ya had tried to help when others stayed silent. When it came time for speeches, Maria stood at a microphone in the same dining room where she'd once been forced to stand in the corner as silent help. Her voice was steady and clear as she talked about erasure and restoration, about what it means to have your identity stripped away and what it takes to reclaim it. She spoke about the house itself, how these walls had witnessed her destruction but now bore witness to her healing. She told the guests that her story wasn't unique, that countless young people in guardianship situations faced abuse and exploitation every year. The charity she was establishing would fund legal advocacy and support services for those young people, ensuring they had someone fighting for them the way Abina had fought for her. She ended her speech with words that resonated through the room. To everyone suffering in silence, you are not invisible. You are not forgotten. Your name matters. The applause was thunderous, and more than a few guests wiped away tears. After the guests left, Maria walked out to the garage with Abina beside her. The space had been completely transformed, no longer a prison, but a bright art studio filled with paintings and natural light. Maria had taken up painting during recovery, finding that putting images on canvas helped process trauma that words couldn't quite capture. The walls were covered with her work, portraits of her mother, abstract pieces representing stages of her healing journey, and one large canvas depicting the garage as it had been, dark and confining, with a door opening to brilliant light beyond. Abina stood looking at that painting for a long time, hand resting on Maria's shoulder. Maria told her about the symbolism, how the garage represented any confining situation that tries to reduce someone to nothing, and the light represented the possibility that always exists, even in the darkest circumstances, the possibility that someone might knock on the door, that truth might surface, that justice might eventually arrive. They stood there together in comfortable silence, grandmother and granddaughter, two survivors who'd found each other across impossible circumstances. The final image was one of restoration in its purest form. Maria and Abina walked through the garden together as evening light turned everything golden. The same garden where Maria had once worked as unpaid labor was now maintained by properly paid staff, and she walked through it as its rightful owner. They talked about business school, about Maria's plans for the future, about the telecommunications company she would someday help run. Abina shared stories about building her empire from nothing, about the failures and lessons that shaped her success, about the legacy she wanted to leave behind. But more than business advice, she gave Maria something more precious, absolute certainty that she was valued, that her name carried weight and meaning, that she belonged to a family and a history that no one could erase. Maria listened and absorbed every word, storing them away like treasures. She thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago, standing at her father's funeral with no idea how dramatically her life was about to change. She thought about the years in the garage, the systematic erasure, the crushing weight of invisibility. And she thought about who she was now, scarred but healing, damaged but not destroyed, still learning who Maria Mensa truly was beneath the layers of trauma. The journey wasn't finished. Healing would take years, maybe a lifetime, but she was on the path, walking beside someone who would never let her be forgotten again. They tried to erase her name, tried to reduce her to nothing, tried to make her believe she had no value beyond what she could provide to others. But they'd forgotten something crucial about names and identity and legacy. Some things can't be erased no matter how hard someone tries. A name written in legal documents and financial records can be buried. But a name written in someone's heart, carried in someone's memory, protected by someone's love, that kind of name is indestructible. Maria Mensa had always been somebody, had always mattered, had always carried her parents' love and her grandmother's legacy. She just needed someone to remember, someone to fight through lies and barriers and distance to bring her back into the light. Akosua had spent 5 years trying to make Maria disappear, but all she'd accomplished was her own destruction. Because at the end of the story, the girl in the garage walked free while the woman who imprisoned her sat in a cell. Justice had taken its time arriving, had moved with frustrating slowness, but it had arrived. And Maria stood in her family's garden with her grandmother's arm around her shoulders, her mother's necklace at her throat, her father's strength in her spine, and her own name, her real name, the one that mattered, restored to her at last. This story proves that truth always surfaces and justice, though delayed, is never denied. If the story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of survival and triumph. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done if you were Akosua's neighbor. Would you have stayed silent or would you have spoken up? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they matter, that their name matters no matter who tries to erase it. Next video drops soon. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, you are never invisible. You are never forgotten. The end.